We're continuing with this theme for July about whole no matter what. And today we're going to talk about who I am reflects how I am. And what that's talking about is what's going on the outside of me is a reflection of how I am on the inside. So here's a question to ask yourself. What would my life be like if I was authentically myself in every relationship that I have? Good question. Good question. Just think about that for a second. What would my life be like if I was authentically myself in every relationship? And I ask this question because relationships are mirrors for us. And when we look at that mirror with curiosity and with objectivity, what we find is we reveal how we see ourselves. We find out how we protect ourselves. And we are invited to grow from that if that's what we choose. So many of us, if not all of us, I know this is true for me, we expect ourselves to be perfect. And I'm talking about perfection from the human perspective. We set this high bar of what perfection is, of what needs to be done. And what happens is it starts to begin an internal war within ourselves of why aren't we meeting that high, frequently unattainable view of what perfection is. And then we begin to start shaming ourselves. And that's when we start creating what we talked about last week about there are no bad parts, there's only good parts, but we start to create these voices within ourselves who we then judge as bad parts. And one thing to look at that I think all of us, I know most of us, if not all of us, can recognize is that self-critical voice that's in our head. The one that says, well, you're not good enough. You're just not enough. You're not ready. You're not spiritual enough. You're not lovable enough. Whatever that voice is saying. And what we do then is we can put masks on. We wear some masks in our relationships to try to hide those parts of ourselves because we want to be perfect from that human perspective. And what happens is we can get this spiritual invitation to shift from perfection to acceptance of who we are in this moment. And it's that we're not perfect. And it's to remember that when we are perfectly human, humans make mistakes. You know, there's that famous adage out there, to err is human, to forgive is divine. And we'll get to that. But mistakes, what happens is when we find ourselves making a mistake, as a human, we have a choice. We can learn from those. And in this process of allowing this greater expression of the truth of who we are to be present in the world, we can love ourselves through this whole process. So sometimes we can jumble things around that if I accept myself where I am right now in this moment, and that self-acceptance now becomes the opposite of growth. Like I'm stagnating myself. But what happens is when we can stop for that moment and find out where we are in this moment, where are we coming from? What happens is the ground that we create with that becomes rich for real growth that becomes possible. Now, Ernest Holmes says, we all seek to become whole. Our apparent unwholeness is in not understanding that part of us which is already whole. And our search for it is occasioned by the fact that something, capital S, something is always telling us that it is there. So we all have this innate knowing of our wholeness, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. And the thing I love the most about this quote is the words apparent unwholeness. Our apparent unwholeness is in not understanding that part of us which is already whole. Our apparent unwholeness. What does that tell me? What that tells me is our the wounds that we have, the masks that we put on, the old stories, the history that we have, all of that may try to hide our truth, but it will never erase it. And it brings me back to that saying of we are spiritual beings. It's not just a saying, this is what I believe. We're spiritual beings. We're having a spiritual experience all the time, and we are in human form. And it is in the human form where those wounds are, where the masks are, where the stories reside. And those are all changeable. What's not changeable is the spiritual being that we are, the love, the peace, the joy that we already are, the beauty that we are. This reminds me of a teaching story. There was a bearer back in ancient times, and she had two pots for carrying water from the stream back to the house that she used every day. One pot was perfect. The other one had a little crack in it. And so as she would walk back from the stream, the cracked pot would dribble water out of it so that by the time she got back to the house, it was about half full. And this went on for many years. And one day, the cracked pot apologized to her. It recognized that it had a flaw, that it was dribbling water, that it wasn't doing its part. It wasn't bringing a full pot of water to the house. And so it apologized to her and said, because of my flaw, you only get half the water that you go down to get. What happened was the water bearer started to smile and said, did you notice the flowers on the path up from the stream? And the pot's like, well, yeah. And she goes, I knew about the crack. I knew that you were dripping that water. And so what I did is I planted seeds along the path, and every day you have watered them. And now because of you, we have this beauty, this beautiful walk back to and from the stream. So maybe the parts of ourselves that we are most tempted to hide are not really proof that we're broken. Maybe they're invitations for us to become compassionate with ourselves. And maybe there are even places where love has quietly been watering the path. Maybe there was a purpose to them. Maybe there was something else going on. Questions we can ask ourselves. As Moni read in the reading today, in this teaching, healing is not about becoming something. It's not about the disease. It's not about the flaw. It's not about anything in our human experience. What it is about revealing the self that has always been there, always will be there. It's that part of us that's rooted in spirit. It's the part of us that is never separate from source. It's that part of us that only knows love and peace and good and joy. And so what happens is the work that is to be done, if going back to that reading, the work to be done is to remove whatever is blocking our awareness of the truth of ourselves. And in this case, relationships are a key place to be able to do this work because it is a view into how we see ourselves. So Ernest Holmes goes on to say that humanity and divinity will be identical when we recognize divinity in humanity. When we begin to recognize divinity in humanity. And he goes on and says, we must learn to see through the apparent and to recognize that at the center of every person's soul, God is enthroned. And so, let's look at this. Let's look at this of this work to be done. Because if our relationships are how we see ourselves, if I am really harsh with myself, if I'm really hard on myself, how might that shape the way that I interpret what others are doing? If I practice compassion towards myself, now what becomes possible in my relationships? So, what I want to do now is introduce you to a spiritual tool that is taught in the new foundations class. Some of you may be familiar with the concept of the castles of kingdoms, four kingdoms of consciousness. What this tool does is it takes that concept and turns it into an awareness scale, the 5 states of awareness. And so I'm going to switch into a slideshow. So I need to share my screen. Let me get this back up. Oh, I'll share this. Share my screen. Okay. Here we go. Thank you. Can you all see the slideshow now? Yeah. So this is a really helpful tool to help us recognize where we are in the present moment on this scale of the states of awareness, of where we are and how we are responding to life. And it becomes a spiritual tool because what we can do now is we can gauge where we are. Where am I vibrating at right now? And it's not to judge ourselves or to judge others. It's to have that awareness of where I am. So am I in this victim mode? Am I the victor? I have this personal power, or am I the vessel who recognizes that I co-create with all of life? Or have I moved into understanding the unity of all life and that I am that life? I am that. And everyone naturally flows through all of these states of awareness, depending on what the circumstances are in the moment. So unlike the kingdoms of consciousness, where I know my little brain likes to interpret it, I have to live in one of those. It's a place. I've got to be there, and they need to be there all the time. And I know I'm not there all the time. And so those little voices, all those voices that say I'm not enough or whatever, can come right in and say, "See, you should be in this castle, not that one." Whereas now this is to me soothes that little engineer in me. It gives me like a gauge, a tachometer, or how many RPM am I in the moment. And I can say, oh, well, this is where I am, and now I'm at choice. So I'm going to very briefly go through this. There's way more to this than, I'm just giving you a highlight, and we can talk about it afterwards. We can do a workshop on it if you want, or we can teach foundations again. So the Oh, well, this becomes this practical application because it is fluid and none of these are permanent, none of these are superior to other, because if you notice, the blue line goes through all of it. We're always there in the I am. So let's go on and look at this. So the first stage is life happens to me. We have a feeling of powerlessness. We're burdened by our circumstances. It's being done to me. And when we recognize when we're in this state, we can choose whether we remain there or whether we shift ourselves out of there. And we can also realize that if we're feeling victimized by circumstance, it does not mean we are in a victim mindset permanently. We don't have to stay there. We're a choice. The next one is called the victor. And it emphasizes that we have personal power. And it focuses on the achievement, because when you move into this, when you're in this, it's like, wow, I made a conscious decision and look at the result that happened. And and it's very, very empowering, especially when you're coming from that feeling of powerlessness. And there is one slight warning there, and everyone who teaches anything like this has this same warning, because we can get stuck here because it just feels so good to be in somewhat of control and to focus on external results because then they're tangible. We can see that result. An important place to be at some point, not necessarily the place to stay, but we're all there. We all can be there at any time. The other one is the vessel, where life happens through me, where we surrender that control and allow spirit to work through us. And we focus, what our focus is on the receptivity, the presence, the fact that we're co-creating, and we're getting the feeling of what it is we desire rather than focusing on the specific outcome itself. And it aligns, well, I like this because it says it aligns our personal purpose with the divine will. And what happens is we also recognize that they're the same. There's no separation between them. And then, so they're calling this the 5 V's. So universe is this one, where spirit is expressing as we. We recognize that there's a wholeness, there's a oneness around, and that we are all interconnected, and there is an impact of what I do as an individual, and that impact is on the collective. It's on the whole. And we calls for us to be compassionate, have intentional action, and we honor the diversity and mutuality of the whole. And the question is, what is mine to do in service of the greater good? Then there's what's called verity. Life expands as me. We're this, and this is something that is not a permanent state. We'd all love for it to be a permanent state, but it's those moments where we feel that transcendence, we feel the unity of everything. You feel yourself as this, with this connection that is greater than, there's no words to explain it when you feel this. And it's a place that we can draw on. We can go bring ourselves there for any time for deeper insight and connection. And the tool that can get us, the other spiritual tool that can get us to this, that I find very useful, is visioning. Visioning can get us, each of us, there. So I'm going to stop sharing. Did it stop? Okay, good. That's a tool. Very brief, but it's a gauge that lets us know where we are at any moment in time. It is, to me, a very valuable tool. And what happens is this now becomes a spiritual practice. It's taking that moment to pause before I respond and do this quick assessment of where I am. And where am I coming from? Am I coming from a sense of I need to protect myself? And am I coming from a perspective, I need to perform, I need them to know who I am? Or am I coming from that perspective of presence? I am, I'm here. And so I don't know if you can read it because the writing might be too small, but off my shoulder is an affirmation. I honor the humanity and divinity in everyone I meet. And when I begin to affirm that, I start changing some of those connections in my mind, in my physical brain, that allows me to start seeing that humanity, or that seeing both the humanity and the divinity in everyone I meet. So what I would ask each of us to do this week is notice when we're coming from that authentic self, from love, from peace, and we recognize that both the humanity and the divinity of the other persons that we are in contact with. But also notice if we're feeling a need to hide or to perform as we are in relationship. And let's stop this inner war that goes on in our, with all these parts of our, and just accept that we are good, messy, and teachable humans. Accept ourselves as we are in this moment. Be that cracked pot and just be the person that we are, and let us go to acceptance of who we are and what we are, and have compassion for ourselves and others so that we can remove those blocks that are in the way of understanding the awareness of our truth. And we can use this gauge of the 5 states of awareness as a tool to help us know where we are in any moment at any time. And so that ends the lesson. Now I'd like to go into prayer. And I would invite each of you to join me in prayer. And so whether it's you want to close your eyes, or however it is for you to center in and just concentrate on the who you are. And just take a moment from the centering Moni did, if you were at the meditation this morning, of being in that space, that I am space that we all have. For what I know is that each and every one of us are here by appointment. That there is this power in this presence. There is this knowing that Ernest Holmes talked about, that something that says we are whole, that knows that we are. For it is that same power and presence that creates, animates, and sustains all of life. And so what I do is I rest in that. I allow myself to be fully present to that. For what I know is that I am, and everyone who hears my voice are all each unique and individualized expressions of the one, and we will always be that. And so what I affirm for every one of us is this ability to be compassionate with ourselves, that to express ourselves as that cracked pot, to not strive for perfection that is out there from the human perspective, but be the perfect wholeness that we are. Accept where we are. Assess where we are. What's blocking me from seeing this wholeness that I am? And do the healing as we talk about, of revealing more of this wholeness. And that is what I know is the truth of each and every one of us. And so in this moment, I go into deep, deep gratitude to know this truth, to express this truth in the word. And so I put this word, I let it go. I put it in the hands of the law that is driven by love, and just allow it to unfold in its perfection. And so it is.